I didn't really understand that I was a sinner in need of a savior.
So when you were that 14 and that your identity was found in drugs, alcohol, partying and things like that, what were you searching for that drug seems to give you at that point in time?
I think at the time I didn't realize that I was trying to like fill a hole or fill a void. But as time goes on and life goes on and life gets hard, that I feel like that void just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And
Isaiah, there is someone watching right now. The person feels that, oh, it's just fun. We are just experimenting with my friends, with drugs, with smoking. What will you say to such a person that feel that, well, I will stop when I want to stop, but then it gets to a point you realize that the drug and the alcohols are now controlling you?
I would say sin is fun for a season. Sin keeps you longer than you want to stay. It takes you farther than you thought you were going to go.
Will you say that peer pressure or associating with wrong people make it easy for you to go into drugs at that point in time?
Funny enough, I felt like I was the one that like peer pressure.
Really?
You know, a lot of my friends, we all kind of started doing some of that stuff like all around the same time. There were still influences in my life that I could gain that access to smoking and drinking. And if I didn't have that access originally, maybe I wouldn't have, tried to go down that path. But ultimately, it was my decision. I was like, you know what? I want to try to smoke weed. Curiosity. That's really, really what it was.
What would you refer to as the darkest moment during those period?
The first one that comes to mind, I want to say I was 19 years old. Me and my buddy that we were going to move out together, we went to go get some pills. And the guy that we usually would get from, he was like, oh, I don't have any more, but I do have these other ones. The other ones were cut with fentanyl, but we didn't know that at the time. And so we bought them. Took them back to my other buddy's house who was, recently going through a breakup. And, he had been drinking a little bit. If you know anything about opiates, you never drink and do opiates at the same time. You shouldn't. We were 19, 20 years old, didn't care. And so we had done these pills that were cut with fentanyl that we were unaware of. My buddy that had been drinking, he had done some, and I couldn't even really read my phone. I was like, whoa, like what's, this is way stronger than anything else. And I remember looking at my friend, and he was completely blue. He stopped breathing. And
what?
I mean, we're talking in a matter of minutes. I'd never seen someone overdose before, but thankfully I knew exactly what was going on. And so I went up to him, I started shaking him, like slapping his face, trying to get him to wake up. He was not waking up. I remember trying to do CPR, but I mean, mind you, I'm also very intoxicated.
Yeah.
And so thankfully I had the wherewithal to, tell my other friend, like, hey, call 911. And so the ambulance came, they Narcaned him, did chest compressions. He came back to. Praise God.
Wow.
Still alive today. He has an incredible testimony as well. He's turned his life around.
Praise God.
Yeah, praise the Lord. But that was my first instance with fentanyl. And you would think that would have been my last instance, but that was just the start of a very dark next 2 years of my life.
Wow, awesome to have you, Isaiah, on the stage of The Void. So let's dive in straight into your story. I love to hear about people's background.
Okay.
Your upbringing, the environment that you grew up in. Can you describe, some of your earliest memory of growing up when you were, say, 5, 6, 7, as much as you can remember? What was that kind of environment growing up, your family dynamics? What does it look like?
Yeah, no, I'd love to dive into that. Thank you again for having me, DJ.
Sure.
I'm really honored. I was very blessed, honestly. I mean, that's just the first word I feel like that comes to mind. No family's perfect, no dynamic's perfect, but my mom and my dad, they never got married. So I never went through like the I guess you could say trauma that some kids go through of like divorce.
Okay.
Because my parents were just never together. It was always, spending time with both. But they both loved me well. They both come from big families, big loving families. And so I stayed with my mom mostly. My mom's one of 7. Okay. Other than one of her siblings, all the others have at least 3 kids or more. So tons of cousins. So when you talk earliest memories, I just remember like family get-togethers, tons of kids, tons of games, tons of love. Both my grandparents are, Bible believing Christians. Okay. They love the Lord, and they raised all their children like that, and their children have raised all their children like that. So yeah, just lots of love in my childhood. And so, things weren't perfect, ideally, and the way that God desires family is, the mom and dad are together. But, my mom met my stepdad when I was like 6 or 7.
Okay.
And so he came into our life. He had 2 daughters. And so it was me and my sister, Olivia, and then his 2 daughters. So now there's 4 of us. And then they had a kid. So now there's 5 of us. And then my dad got remarried, and he's got 3. So I have lots of siblings.
Wow. that's a large family. That's interesting.
Yes.
So what were some of the fun, exciting times that when you think back, some of those childhood memories that just bring smiles to your face when you think of them now?
I would say sports is probably a big one. I got into sports when I was like 4 or 5. Made a lot of friends that way, playing soccer, basketball, flag football, baseball. And so a lot of my earliest memories, I would say I would attribute to just learning how to play sports, getting better at it, team bonding, and just growing through that. Yeah, I would say sports.
I guess you have the desire to go professional, to play maybe NBA or professional soccer at that time as well, right?
Oh yeah, my first dream was a professional soccer player. That's what I set my mind on. I remember watching the World Cup when I was maybe like 10 or 11, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a professional soccer player.
So where did that dream end?
Well, so when I got into junior high, I started doing track and field.
Okay.
And I ended up being pretty good at it. I originally wanted to go to college and play soccer, because obviously if I want to be a professional soccer player, I gotta, make it from high school into college. And I loved soccer. I still love soccer, all the way through my high school. But in high school, as I was doing track and field, I was showing a lot of promise of, being pretty good. I was getting recruited by some colleges. So I ended up going down that path and doing track and field. So I guess that's probably where the dream maybe died is when I, also realized that I probably was never going to be good enough. I wasn't even the best person on my high school team. So, that kind of kills that dream too.
It's all right, because I guess the chances of maybe 1 out of hundreds of thousands of kids to get into professional games is very slim.
Yep.
But somehow parents, push their kids towards that part at times.
Right.
So now let's dive in a little bit deeper.
Okay.
At 14 years old, what were some of your memory of what life looked like at 14 years old? Because I remember that, at that time, kids start to form a sense of identity, a sense of who they are, who they want to become.
Yeah.
For you, what were your earliest memory of who you want to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was 14, that's kind of when I would say my testimony started kicking off, when things kind of started maybe not looking so good for my future. And a lot of it was wrapped into identity and who I identified myself to be. A lot of my identity was wrapped up in sports. A lot of my emotional stability was kind of dependent on how well I was maybe doing in the sport that I was playing in that season. I also put a lot of identity into like my friends and who my friends were, and just like being a social person. I would say those two things are not sustainable to be an identity that will last. And because, what man creates, man can destroy, but what God creates, no one can destroy.
Yeah.
And although I grew up going to church and, I mean, we would pray before meals. You know, my mom was big on us, you know, reading the Bible, whether we did or not. You know, she wanted us to. But my identity never really came from any of those things. I really just didn't care, you know, as sad as it is to say. It just wasn't, it wasn't the first thing on my mind, you know. I wanted to be a good athlete, a good student. And yeah, I would say when I was 14 years old, those were the main things I was focused on. And, you know, probably right when I was about to turn 15 or getting closer to 15 is when I started, you know, kind of hanging out with the wrong people and doing some of the wrong things, you know, starting to drink and smoke. And then my identity got wrapped up into that lifestyle. And, you know, I like how that makes me feel. And, you know, you feel like you're cool because you're hanging out with 18-year-olds as a 15-year-old, you know, smoking and drinking, which at the end of the day, we're all still kids, you know. But yeah, I would say that's kind of some of the memories that I have at 14. So
you hit a very important point on the head right there, that at the beginning, you know, your sense of identity was wrapped in sports, in your friends, and things like that. Even though your parents were believers, you pray, read the Bible. I'm curious why none of that really connects to your heart, because I guess at that time too you were going to church.
Right.
Looking back now, is there something that you think was missing in that experience that made your heart not to click with all of maybe the youth camp, the church activities, the prayers over meal, or things like that?
Right. That's a good question. I think I've thought about it a lot, you know, because I'm getting ready to have my own kid here soon, you know, and so it's like, okay, what do I need to do? What kind of things do I need to implement? Where did it go wrong with me? And, you know, and my mom's even asked me that too, and I've, you know, told her many times, like, I don't look back and think that you did anything wrong necessarily, you know. She always would pray for me. You know, sure, we would get into our bickering matches and our fights and stuff like that. But even at the times where I felt like I couldn't stand her, I still would always go back to her. I still would lean on her. I think the biggest thing, just looking back to my mindset at that point, was that I didn't really understand that I was a sinner in need of a savior. I knew that all sinned, right? We all needed Jesus. But it wasn't like personal for me, you know. It was just kind of like this broad thing. I'd heard the gospel so many times, which is good, but I felt like also it kind of got maybe watered down for me to some degree. Like, or I tuned it out every time I hear it because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm already saved. I've already been baptized, you know. But I wasn't really serving God. I wasn't serving Jesus. I wasn't, it just wasn't like a priority for me. And I knew that, you know, I wasn't, you know, when I would drink and smoke, like I knew those weren't things that someone who's a Christian should do. Like I had that moral compass to know what was right and what was wrong. And I remember I would just tell myself, oh, when I get older, I'll get it right. You know, when I get older, I'll make sure me and God are good. You know, when I go to get married or whatever, which is not a good realm of thinking.
Yeah.
You know? So
interesting. Yeah. So to still go that line a little bit, for me, I had a similar experience, you know, but looking back, at times I feel that the Christian faith was not presented as an adventurous experience, because you look to your friends, there is a sense of bonding that you are looking for that you don't see within the Christian community, so to say. There is a level of risk that you are looking for, that you know, the Christian things looks too safe, too easy peasy, and you know, but as a teenager, you are looking for something that will make your adrenaline to run high. You know. It's
that rebellious side. I heard it said that, like, no one had to teach you how to sin. You know, that's part of our nature. We're born into sin. And so no one had to teach you how to do these things, you know, that gratification of the flesh that's almost natural for us. And So, in high school, yeah, I wanted that adrenaline. I liked feeling like I was getting away with something or sneaking around. I used to sneak out of my house, all of these. I mean, I'm just thankful I never gave my mom a heart attack, honestly. I'm sure if she was here, she'd say I probably got pretty close a few times.
I can imagine the pain of a mother.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when you were that 14 and that your identity was found in drugs, alcohol, partying and things like that, what were you searching for that drugs seems to give you at that point in time?
That's a good question. You're asking some bangers here. Man, I think at the time I didn't realize that I was trying to like fill a hole or fill a void. At that age, I don't think I had the emotional intelligence to recognize that. It was more just like, yeah, this is fun. I'm just doing it with my friends. And maybe even at that time, maybe I wasn't even trying to fill a void. But as time goes on and life goes on and life gets hard, that I feel like that void just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it did reach a point, maybe when I was like 18 or 19, where I think I maybe started to realize that I am smoking or drinking or doing different drugs, partying, whatever it might be, to numb, to try to numb any bad feelings I had. The one downside, well, I shouldn't say one, there's many downsides to, not having, mother and father together, the dynamic, how it's supposed to be, is, a father is really supposed to teach a young man how to emotionally regulate, especially going through puberty and all this stuff. It's like you have all the like anger and sadness and, lust and all these different things. And if there's no one really there to teach you how to navigate through that, you're just kind of left to your own vices. And, my stepdad, he worked a lot. My mom, she tried her best. My dad, we would see him every other weekend. And so it just wasn't set up the way that it's necessarily supposed to be. And so with that, I never knew how to control my anger. I never knew how to control, when I would get frustrated or sad or, even happy, like I just didn't know how to control those emotions. And so I would like lean on smoking because it would mellow me out, or drinking because it would make me forget, or doing pills because I wouldn't feel anything, whatever it might be. And over time, that void just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more you keep trying to use things to numb, it gets less and less effective,
Isaiah, there is someone watching right now. The person feels that, it's just fun. We are just experimenting with my friends, with drugs, with smoking. At what will you say to such a person that feel that, well, I will stop when I want to stop, but then it gets to a point you realize that you are not determining or controlling when to stop, but rather the drug and the alcohols are now controlling you. What will you say to such a person right now?
I would say sin is fun for a season. It would be a lie to be like it's not fun at all. 'Cause nobody would be enticed to it, right?
True.
But sin keeps you longer than you want to stay. It takes you farther than you thought you were gonna go. And when I was 14, 15 years old, I remember my mom finding out that I smoked, and she was in tears, and just wanted me to stop. And I remember telling her, like, Mom, it's just a little weed, like we're just smoking, it's not harming anybody, like I'm not going to go any farther than this. I remember telling her that. I was probably 15 years old. I'm not going to do anything else but this. I mean, I think that next year I'd tried something new. It breaks down your defenses. The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5:8 to be sober-minded, be watchful, for your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And so when you aren't being of a sober mind, when you aren't being watchful and aware of your surroundings, all of a sudden new things creep in, and you find yourself inching closer and closer to that roaring lion, until you are devoured, which is that point where you lose control. You're no longer in control of, I'll stop when I want to stop. Anytime someone tells me that, I'm like, okay, then just do it. If you can stop whenever you want to. I don't want to. It's like, I don't think it's that you don't want to. I don't think you can, But you got to come to that self-realization yourself, when you're still in that pride, because ultimately that's what it is pride, saying I can do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. That is entirely prideful. And when you're still in that, you're never going to admit that you're wrong or be like, oh yeah, I'll just stop. You have to come to this point, sadly, where it's a lot of people's rock bottom, where you hit this point of like, oh man, I've ruined everything. I've caused destruction all around me, and sometimes for some people it's too late, maybe you end up doing something really stupid and now you're in prison, or you're drinking and driving and you killed somebody, like there's some very severe punishments that can sometimes come with that.
Wow. So will you say that peer pressure or associating with wrong people had or make it easy for you to go into drugs at that point in time?
It's funny because I've been asked this, especially by like my mom or other family members, like, did you feel like you were peer pressured? And funny enough, I felt like I was the one that like peer pressured my friend. Really? Me, a lot of my friends, we all kind of started, doing some of that stuff like all around the same time. And I don't know what it was. I mean, there were still influences in my life that I could gain that access to smoking and drinking. And if I didn't have that access originally, maybe I wouldn't have, tried to go down that path. But ultimately, it was my decision. I was like, you know what? I want to try to smoke weed, Curiosity. That's really, really what it was, I'm not sure why, I guess I just didn't have that fear, that some people have. I know a lot of people, they're just like, I'm just scared of doing it. And not even like a moral thing, just like I'm scared of what might happen if I do it. I sadly did not have that. Courage is good if it's used in the right way. That is not a good way to utilize courage.
Isaiah, tell me, at what point did your parents were aware that you were into drugs?
Well, I would say there's a couple different points. When I was 15, that was the first time like my mom and my stepdad had found out that I was like smoking weed, and drinking and stuff like that, just doing things kids shouldn't do. And my mom tried to ground me and all these different punishments, and it would work for a little bit, but then it wouldn't. And but my mom, I think throughout high school, I don't think my mom really knew that I'd been doing anything else except maybe smoking weed. And I tried my best to hide it from her. She probably knew more times I was high than not, but I think she came to a point where she knew that she had really no control over the situation, that she had to just trust God. They had rules in their household, like you're not going to have that stuff here, you're not going to do that stuff here, trying to really protect my little sisters. But praise the Lord that I'm a transformed man now, because I was very rebellious, very disrespectful, manipulative, a pathological liar. I would lie straight to your face and just die on that hill. Then later on in life, I moved out of my parents' house when I was like 19, got my own apartment, and at this point, I'd tried a lot of other stuff, but I was pretty consistent with doing, pills or, like party drugs, psychedelics, bunch of different stuff. And I think my mom maybe knew that I wasn't doing okay, because I would go like stretches of time without really talking to her, which isn't like me. I mean, even now we still talk at least once every couple days, over the phone. But once I really started getting bad in the pills, to the point where it was causing me to like withdraw, and have these different symptoms, that's when I had told my mom originally, and I think I was like 20 at that time. And so then at that point she kind of started to realize that, okay, like there's a bigger problem at hand.
To pick up from there, what are some blind spot that you think parents are not willing to admit to when they hear that their child or their loved one is into drugs? Looking back now, or is there something that parents, when you love someone so much, there is a tendency for you not to admit that they are in error, and but looking back, what would be some of those maybe missing signs or early signs of things that parents were not willing to admit to? And at times, I think that you can speak point into this, that maybe parents feel that people will see them as a failure, and therefore they are not willing to admit to that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on maybe the stage of life your child's in. A kid that's in high school, it's going to be a little bit different because obviously the kid's still living at home with you.
Yeah.
And so you have a little bit more direct access to that kid, to their room, search their belongings, their car, especially if you paid for it. And so you can kind of handle that in a different way. If your kid is grown, or maybe not grown, but like out of the house, right? Like in their 20s or at college or something like that. It can be hard. I know for a lot of parents, there is that embarrassment factor. And I think that does stem from like feeling like that they failed. Because ultimately it's your child, it was up to you to raise them and all of this stuff. And so it can definitely feel like that you had failed at some point or another. And if you aren't mature enough to, navigate through that, a lot of parents end up in denial, and just being like, well, no, that's not, I didn't fail. So they're definitely not struggling. Or they just put it completely on their kid. Well, if they're struggling, that's their problem, whatever. And then you also get parents that sometimes fall more into the enabling category, where they, just continue to enable the behavior, really thinking that they're helping their kid, giving them money when they ask, or, bailing them out of jail, or, just different things like that, which ultimately just enables them to continue in that behavior pattern.
I'm curious about during this phase of when you were between 14 to 21, maybe what would you refer to as a darkest night or a darkest moment during those period?
Oh man, well, there's a couple. There's quite a few. I'm a pretty stubborn person, so God had to humble me quite a few times before I finally listened. The first one that comes to mind, I want to say I was 19 years old, and me and one of my best friends, we were about a month away from moving out, moving out of my parents' house. Okay. He was moving out of his parents' house. We're moving to a different town. And another one of my best friends, he had just recently gone through a breakup. I had recently gone through a breakup. And so me and my buddy that we were going to move out together, we went to go get some pills. We were doing what's called Percocets. Just painkillers, pretty much, like oxycodone kind of thing. And the guy that we usually would get from, he was like, oh, I don't have any more, but I do have these other ones. The other ones were cut with fentanyl. But we didn't know that at the time. We just thought, there's still pain pills. That's what we want. That's what we came to get. And so we bought them. Took them back to my other buddy's house who was, recently going through a breakup. And, he had been drinking a little bit, which if you know anything about opiates, you never drink and do opiates at the same time. You shouldn't, It's just, it's two downers. And has a high chance of leading to overdose. And so, but, we were 19, 20 years old, didn't care. And so we had done these pills that were cut with fentanyl that we were unaware of. My buddy that had been drinking, he had done some, and we were sitting on the couch and, we were talking. I remember looking at my phone and it started hitting me. and I couldn't even really read my phone. I was like, whoa, like what's, this is way stronger than anything else. And I remember looking at my friend, and he was completely blue.
Wow.
Like his whole face was blue. He stopped breathing. And
What?
I mean, we're talking in a matter of minutes. Like I was talking to him, having a conversation, looked at my phone, looked back, and I mean, he looked like a Smurf. And so I'd never seen someone overdose before, but thankfully I knew exactly what was going on. And so I went up to him, I started shaking him, like slapping his face, trying to get him to wake up. He was not waking up. Threw him on the ground. I remember trying to do CPR, but I mean, mind you, I'm also very intoxicated.
Yeah.
And so like I have no strength in my arms. Like I can't even, like I just felt like I had noodle arms. I couldn't do the chest compressions. And even if I could, I don't even know if I would have known how to do it properly. And so thankfully I had the wherewithal to, tell my other friend, like, hey, call 911. Like we gotta call 911. And so the ambulance came, they Narcaned him. I think they had to Narcan him twice, did chest compressions. He came back to, praise God.
Wow.
Still alive today. He has an incredible testimony as well. He's turned his life around.
Praise God.
Yeah, praise the Lord. But that was my first instance with fentanyl. And you would think that would have been my last instance, but that was just the start of a very dark next 2 years of my life. So asking like what my darkest night was, man, that's hard, because I mean that night right there really kicked off the next 2 years of like the darkest 2 years of my life. And there were glimpses of hope and throughout there, but that was between 19 and 21. That was a very, very difficult time, and that's kind of, that moment just is kind of like I don't know, it just reminds me of like kind of what had started. That was right before 2021. You would think I would have flushed the pills away, would have never touched them again, but I didn't. I kept them, and I was like, oh, I'll just be safer next time. We won't do as much. We'll do smaller amounts, and it's just sick. It shows how lost you can get in that sin. It takes you farther than you ever thought you would go.
So as when people look at you at that time period of 17, 18, 19, 21, what did they see? Who did they see? And what were they missing that you wish they knew?
I think I was pretty good at hiding it. At least in small talk or in passing, or maybe just on social media. I mean, I don't think by any means I looked like I had it all put together, but I don't think most people knew that I was struggling to the level of which I was at that time. There were people who were very close to me, people that I worked with, that didn't even really know until closer to when I like finally got the help that I really needed. Those 6 months leading up to that, I think most people who were close enough to me definitely probably knew at that point, because it was past the point of really being able to hide well, but I think when most people looked at me, they probably just looked at, just a young kid just working. I worked as a server at Logan's Roadhouse, just making money, living in an apartment. They probably saw someone that maybe partied a little bit, stuff like that, would drink on the weekends, smoke weed, which, isn't harmless, but comparatively to what was actually going on, was definitely a lot more mild.
I'd say. So during those phases of life, can you share some of the lie that you believe about yourself during those period? And also, who were you trying to impress during that phase of life?
I don't necessarily think I was trying to impress anyone. I think maybe I was trying to, prove myself worthy, which is like a weird sentence to say, because it's like, how are you going to prove yourself worthy doing pills, but like I said, I so much of my identity growing up was wrapped in sports and then in friends, When I was a junior in high school, I had a girlfriend, my first girlfriend, and so my identity was wrapped up with her. And then in partying, my identity was wrapped up in partying. And so moving into out of high school, I went to college for a year. I did track and field. But then 2020 happened. COVID happened. Everything got shut down. There was no more track. There was no more school. Everything got moved to online. Everybody got sent home. And so, my identity in sports, is now nowhere to be found, really. Not long after that, me and, my high school girlfriend, I think we were dating 3 years at that time, we had broken up. And so now my identity that was wrapped up in her is now gone. A lot of my friends, when you graduate high school, you lose a lot of friends, right? People go to different colleges. You just don't remain as close. And so, between, me and my ex breaking up and then, just that, I lost a lot of friends during that time. And so all I was really left with was just this identity of partying. And so I think I found my only worth in, doing drugs, selling drugs, being that guy that people could go to, for where's the next party at? Where's the, where's the move, stuff like that. I think that's the only way I really felt any kind of importance in my life, because outside of that, I was just working as a server, in a restaurant. That's not really a career,
So that gave you meaning and purpose.
In a sick, twisted kind of way, yes, I would say so. But it didn't last, it's just a dead end. There's no growing past that. All it leads to is either prison or death, ultimately. And I knew that. And we talk about my darkest times. I mean, my many darkest nights that I had were me not wanting to live anymore, because I was just like, that's where I'm heading towards anyways. I didn't think I was going to live to see 21 for a while. And then I did live to see 21, but I didn't think I was going to live to see that next year. 21 was when I turned 21, that was probably when I was close to the height of my addiction. And I was pretty confident that I was not going to make it to the next birthday, And so here I am, 24,
Praise God. Praise God. Praise God. So at that time, when you think that you will not even see your 21st birthday, what was going through your mind?
Well, I was, really addicted to these fentanyl pills. At that point, I'd already been to rehab once, and I had relapsed. I went to rehab that year before when I was 20. And I'd relapsed a few months before I turned 21. And it was way worse than it was before. When I went to rehab the first time, I was maybe doing 1 or 2 pills a day, which is, with fentanyl, it's still a lot, but now, creeping up on my 21st birthday, I think I was doing 3 or 4 pills a day. And then over the next 6 months, it grew up to 10 a day, which is just, that's not doable. You can't, I was working, and all my money that I made was going straight to pills.
Wow.
Because I couldn't function without them. It got to a point where I wasn't even really getting high. I was just maintaining. It was just that's how I could go through my normal day, is using these pills. So it was no way that anybody really wants to live. Even when you're in that, you don't want to live like that. And I really thought well, I'm not getting out of this. The only way is through death, And there was times that I tried, I would try to do a bigger amount than what I normally would do, to just try to kind of suicide by overdose. But I'd always wake up the next morning, or a few hours after that, I'd pass out for a while, wake up somewhere random in my apartment, and it never really worked. And it's, you know, I'm glad it didn't work. I'm very thankful.
Yeah.
It didn't work. And, you know, it's crazy looking back on it now. Like, I knew the only way out was death. And ultimately, that is what happened. You know, I came to know Christ, and that old person did die.
Definitely.
And new, you know, the new has come. And so it's crazy how, like, full circle that is.
Interesting. If we may stay a little bit on that, was there a moment during those periods that you started to hate yourself and having a sense of shame?
Yeah, for sure. There was, especially there towards the end, like, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Like, I'd go to the bathroom and I, like, because I didn't recognize myself.
Really?
You know? I was just like, I don't, you know, because no one in my family had ever, I mean, sure, yeah, some people drink and stuff like that, but there was no real alcoholism in my family, no real drug abuse in my family. You know, I was kind of like this black sheep. And so there was a lot of shame and guilt, and, you know, and I was in high school. Yes, I was doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, but, you know, I was like this promising athlete. You know, I was smart. I went to college. When I went to college, you know, I was doing track and field. I was studying computer science. You know, from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, you know, he's got it made. You know, he's got a promising future ahead of him. And within a matter of 2 years, now I'm this junkie working at a restaurant that can't go more than 4 hours without doing a pill, you know? So I hated who I'd become. I hated myself. I felt like I was just a burden to my family, you know, just like a disgrace, really. And so, yeah, I couldn't even, I'd go to the bathroom and I'd literally like just shield my face. I couldn't look at myself.
And I will imagine that during those periods, you will be thinking that the world will be better without you. And you could not even help yourself.
Right.
And so the next thought in your mind was to take your life.
I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I would try to do enough drugs where I wouldn't wake up. But no, in the sense that, like, I wasn't going to resort to, you know, hanging myself or shooting myself or jumping off a building. Like, I didn't have the courage, I guess you could say. You know, not that that's even a courageous thing, but, like, I didn't have it in me to take it that far. But it was like, if I could just overdose, you know, just do too much where I pretty much, you know, die in my sleep. Which, I mean, it's really dying by suffocation, because really what an overdose is your brain just gets so numb that it forgets to tell itself to breathe. It forgets to tell your body to breathe, and then you just kind of stop breathing, which is, you know, not a good way to go. But, but you know, I was, I guess, content with, like, going out like that. But I don't know if it was my tolerance was too high, or, you know, I think it was just the Holy Spirit, you know. God wasn't done with me yet. He wasn't gonna, my time was not yet.
Were you aware of what was going on internally within you at that time, and also your body? Were you aware of, yes, you did not like what you look like, but in terms of your strength, in terms of, you know, maybe an inner voice, were you aware, or what kind of voices were you hearing from within during those periods?
Oh, man. I wish I had my mom here that she could help answer this question, because I remember there were times that I would call her and I would tell her, like, these dreams that I was having, or these, like, things that I was seeing, and, you know, my memory's so bad just from that time. Like, I don't have a great memory, but I do remember, like, I would say almost like some sort of demonic oppression. You know, I just would have dreams of just, like, darkness trying to overtake me, you know, and that's why I said I wish my mom was here, because she probably remembers exactly what I was telling her. I don't remember exactly, but there were times where I would just be, like, hallucinating, and you know, I wouldn't say I heard, like, necessarily, like, audible voices, but my internal voice was just very negative, very hateful towards myself, towards the world around me. I mean, I would go get groceries and I would just like look at people in spite, you know, like if I saw someone laughing, I'd be like, they're not happy, you know, like they're just faking it. Nobody's happy. There's no joy in the world. There's no hope, you know, like just very, very, very negative, very, very negative person. But there was definitely a darkness around me. You know, I hated the sunlight. It was kind of weird. Like I put a blanket up above my window because I liked my room being dark, you know. It's like, I think there's a lot of symbolism there, you know, when you're in darkness, you know, doing these things that bring about shame and guilt. It's like you kind of just want to stay in that dark place, you know. I would see the sun coming up in the morning. I'd be like, dang it, you know. It would like, I just wanted it to stay dark all the time, and that's just the life that I was living at that time.
Isaiah, there is a parent or someone that have or know someone that is currently in this state that you just described right now. A parent that have a child that is in that state, or someone that loved someone in that state right now. What will you tell such a person that will be helpful for someone that is in that state like you were right now?
That's a tough one. Prayer has to be the first weapon that you utilize. You know, I know my mom, you know, my stepdad, dad, my grandparents, you know, they were praying over me. Aunts, uncles, you know, cousins. Like I had lots of people praying over me, and I truly think that, you know, one of the many reasons maybe that God spared me was from the prayers of my family, prayer warriors in my family. And so if you have a loved one or know somebody, your first step has to be prayer. And sometimes it doesn't look like, you know, God, please help them out of this. Sometimes it looks like, God, please help them hit their rock bottom so that they can turn to you. Because that's what's needed, is that person has to recognize that there is no way out. There is no pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. There's no, like, I can just use, you know, my self-will. Like, you have to let go and let God and ask him to come in and clean you up and save you from yourself. But if you don't hit that point, that rock bottom, and everybody's rock bottom is different, you know. There's some people that their rock bottom seems kind of mild, maybe. There's other people that they end up going to prison, and that's still not their rock bottom, you know. They're still not done with the life that they were living. But for that parent or loved one that has someone, you know, just be in prayer and continually asking God to just break their legs. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what's needed, you know. Don't be that enabler. Don't continue to enable that person to continue living that life. Sometimes tough love is sometimes the purest love that you can show someone. You know, cutting off that support, it can be hard, especially for a parent, especially for a mother. A mother and a son, or a father and a daughter. You know, sometimes it's you know, you want to do anything and everything in your power to help them, and sometimes the best thing you can do to help them is by not helping them. You know, not giving them any more money, letting them get kicked out of their apartment, you know, and having to figure out maybe they have to be on the street for a little bit. But if that's the moment that causes them to realize that something needs to change and they turn to Christ, then it's worth it, you know. Then you constantly bringing them in and constantly paying for, you know, bailing them out, paying for their bills, paying for, I mean, ultimately their drugs, you know, because that might end up leading to you having to pay for their casket.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
So.
Wow. Now, let's change gear and start talking about the turning point. I'm excited
to
hear about this.
Yeah.
So, At what point did you now say, I am done?
So it was, I got to give a lot of credit to my mom.
Okay.
You know, thankfully we had a close relationship during this time, and she was very non-judgmental of me.
Wow.
Which is another, I would say another big thing for parents that are out there that have kids that are struggling or whatever, you know, being that safe space for your kid to come to you. That doesn't mean you stop showing tough love sometimes or whatever, but, you know, my mom, she did her best not to enable me, but she also was always there for me, and sometimes made hard decisions for me. But I know when I had relapsed again, I told her, you know, so to give you more of a timeline, this would have been 2022. I turned 21 in May of that year. Going into like July, the addiction just got worse and worse and worse. I was using every single day. It was getting more and more and more every single day. And every year, my whole family gets together for 4th of July. And so I went to my aunt's house, and my mom and others in my family could kind of tell something was off, but thought maybe I was just working a lot, maybe I was tired, you know, or whatever. And I remember my hair was a little longer, and my mom was like braiding my hair. And I told her, I was like, hey, Mom, you know, I relapsed, but I'm going to rehab. Like, I had found a rehab for myself. It was more like a detox, just like a 14-day thing that you go just to get clean, kind of restart. And so I told her, I was like, you know, you don't have to worry. I've already, you know, called this place. They accept the insurance. Like, but I wanted to tell her, because usually when you go to these places, you don't have access to your phone. And she would be extremely worried if she didn't hear from me for 14 days, you know? So, and I know at this point for my mom, she became aware that this situation was much more dire than what she thought previously. Because I went to rehab about 9 months before that point. And my mom helped me find the place. They sent me there. I was there for like 35 days, came back, felt good, you know. It wasn't a Christ-centered rehab. It was just a secular rehab. You know, they teach you once an addict, always an addict, that you just kind of have to keep reminding yourself this, and, you know, one day, you know, or maybe you'll continue to just go the rest of your life without using, you know, get into groups, you know, all of this stuff. And that stuff works for some people. I tried it. You know, I got into the gym. I was working out. I was working a lot of hours, you know, just kind of keeping myself busy, which is what a lot of people call white knuckling it. You know, I don't know if you've ever been tubing before, but when you're like holding on so tight, your knuckles start to turn white. That's kind of what that was. I was white knuckling sobriety, you know, just like doing everything I could to not think about it, not do it. That only lasted a few months. And so I'd relapsed, you know, and my mom didn't know. I told her. I went to the detox, got out. My mom was much more involved at this point, you know, calling me, checking up on me, like, hey, how are you doing? You know, have you started meeting with a therapist yet? Have you been going to groups? You know, stuff like that. And at first, yes. And then, you know, not long after that detox, I went right back to using pills. Like, it wasn't, I got clean, but I didn't learn anything. I didn't, like, go through any kind of transformation mentally. I just physically got clean. That's pretty much all it was. And so I started lying to my mom. Yeah, I'm going to therapy. Yeah, I've been going to my group, stuff like that. And then I think she started to catch on. And at some point, you know, my memory is very hazy because at this point I was using a lot. But I do remember my mom was like, you know, did you relapse? And the way she said it, it wasn't like condescending. It wasn't like, you know, like what was going to follow was anger or wrath. You know, it was in a very gentle way, you know, like, honey, did you relapse? You know, and I was like, yeah, you know, I did. And she was like, okay, what are we going to do? And I was like, well, I probably need to go back to rehab. And I remember she asked me, she was like, okay, do you want to find the place or do you want me to find the place? And I just wasn't in a good state of mind. I knew if I said I would find it, I never would find it. I wouldn't look it up, you know. I was in and out of consciousness a lot, you know, all this stuff. And so I told her, I was like, why don't you find it? And sure enough, she did, and she started looking up Christ-centered recovery.
Christ-centered recovery.
Christ-centered recovery. Because she knew that I didn't just need these different doctors or therapists telling me these different stuff. And not that doctors aren't great, not that therapists aren't great. They're much needed in our society for a multitude of different things. But my mom knew that I needed Christ. She knew that I needed transformation in my heart. And that would then produce the fruits of sobriety, and so she found this place called Spring to Life Recovery right here in Middle Tennessee. I remember she sent me the link, and I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, they teach the Bible. It's all men's, and I remember I was like, Mom, I'm not going here. And I was like, I don't even know where Woodbury, Tennessee is. Like the other places I went to were like in Florida, these very bougie, lush kind of places. And, like I had said earlier, I was a very manipulative person. And the person I was able to manipulate the most outside of myself was probably my mom. And so I was telling her, I'm not going to that. I'm not doing that. And this is how I know the Holy Spirit was at work, because she was like, no, you're going. And we're leaving on this day, and we're taking you, and you don't have a choice really in the matter. And I was like, okay, there's not much I can really say about that, but it's kind of crazy, how the enemy was working in me at that point, trying to get me not to go. Because my mom would have caved, and I would have just went to another bougie place that doesn't really teach you much, except that once an addict, always an addict, which I think is a toxic mindset to have. I probably wouldn't have made it, I probably wouldn't be here. But because she had that strength from within, from the Holy Spirit, to be like, nope, we're leaving on, it was September 10th, 2022, and you're going. And so very thankful for that.
So 2 questions around that. One, in that moment that you cried out for help, so to say, what did surrender actually feel like inside?
I'm not sure if I even recognize that moment necessarily as surrender. I think it was more just like, I know how this goes, right? I relapse, do drugs, have to go back to rehab. Relapse, do drugs, have to go back to rehab. And so in my mind, it was just kind of like, here we go again. We're just doing this thing again. And I really had a pretty negative mindset about it. I mean, I was, as we talked about before, a little suicidal, and I told myself, this is the last time. This is the last time I'm doing this, and if this doesn't work, I'm not going back to rehab. I'm not doing it again. I'll just die a junkie, The surrender, there definitely is a moment of surrender, but I wouldn't say that moment, I saw it as that. It was surrender in that moment. I was definitely surrendering, but it didn't feel like that in that moment. And, about a week or so later, there was this moment of surrender for sure.
Your mom said, this date we are going to S2L. And you said yes. What did your mother see in you that you couldn't see in yourself at that moment?
I just think she hadn't given up hope, which is something that I definitely gave up on. I had no hope. I didn't think there was any fixing me or my situation. But she, my stubbornness I get from her. So, she was not done with me yet. She was not giving up on me yet. And, her and my stepdad both were not going to just let me go die. They weren't going to just let me just throw in the white towel and just give up. And so, I was trying to make up all these excuses. Oh, well, I got to get my rent paid, or, I got to get my car payment, or I remember I had a suspended license at that time. And so I had a court date for that. And it was like on September 19th or something like that. And I was like, well, I got to wait till this day because I have to at least do court. She's like, no, you're going to go to the court like today or tomorrow, you're going to ask them to postpone it for 6 weeks, because she knew that's how long the program was 6 weeks. And we're taking you on the 10th. You know, she was just like, there's like no arguing about it. And so, you know, I think she probably just saw the boy that she raised, you know. I'd lost a lot of who I was in that time. You know, the energy that I had, the joy that I had, the intelligence that I had, you know, like I wasn't even speaking rationally a lot of times. You know, my thought processes just didn't make sense. And so she probably just saw somebody that I wasn't and knew that I was still in there, and she just wasn't going to give up on that.
As a son, a mother watching that is at the verge of giving up hope, what will you say to such a mother? If
you give up hope, then there is none. And what I mean by that is, if your son or daughter is giving up on themselves, you might be the only person left.
Wow.
That's not giving up on them. Whether it's a mother or father, you know, but a lot of times, like friends, you know, as great as friends are, and there are some really great friends out there. You know, I had some really great friends out there that didn't want to give up on me, but they also didn't have the ability to help me necessarily. They didn't have the ability to, you know, they didn't have that access to really help me get to where I needed to go. But for the mom or the dad, like, you just cannot give up hope, because you might be the last person that has not given up on your son or daughter, even after they've given up on themselves, you know? And if you give up on them and they recognize that you've given up on them, you know, that can be devastating in a lot of ways, you know? And it can seem weird too, because especially if you're operating in that tough love, where they might recognize it as, oh, you're just giving up on me. And that's not what it is at all. You know, you can still have hope and administer tough love, you know?
Interesting.
I personally feel like there's a big difference. And you know, our hope comes from Jesus.
Absolutely.
Our hope comes from the Lord. And I know that if my mom was operating in her own strength, she maybe would have gave up on me, you know? But she wasn't operating in her own strength. She was operating in the strength of the Holy Spirit and had that supernatural hope, you know.
Interesting. Amazing. Earlier on, you mentioned that you've been to some rehabs before this time, and each one even told you then that once an addict, always an addict. Why didn't that sit right with you?
Well, at the time, it's not that it felt wrong, but it definitely didn't feel right. Now I definitely know what it is, but I'll start with at that time. Rationally, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, okay, I know from playing sports, right, that what you tell yourself is very important. If you tell yourself, I'm going to miss this shot, I'm going to miss this shot, I'm going to miss this shot, there's a good chance you're going to miss the shot.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if I'm constantly telling myself, I'm an addict, but I'm trying not to be an addict, that it just didn't make a lot of sense. Now, how I rationalized it in my own mind is that, you know, we have to come to this point of recognizing that we're an addict, or recognizing that we're a sinner, ultimately. You know, if you don't recognize you're lost, how can you be found, right?
Yep.
So I understood it from that aspect. But I remember going to a meeting, this is at the first rehab I went to, and there was a guy, you know, we would go to these AA or NA meetings, and you'd stand up, you'd be like, hi, my name's Isaiah, I'm an addict, you know, and then you would go on and share a little something, you know, or an alcoholic. Sometimes people would be like, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And I remember this guy stood up, and he was like, you know, let's just say his name was, you know, I don't know, David or something. He's like, hi, my name's David. I'm an addict. I've been clean for 15 years. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, how could you still consider yourself something that you haven't done in 15 years, you know? But at that time, I was 20 years old. These people were professionals, right? They're professional addiction recovery specialists, doctors. therapists that have degrees and all these letters after their names, you know. And so I was like, hey, you know, if they say this is what it is, you know, they told me that addiction is a disease, that I'm gonna, you know, have to battle it for the rest of my life, you know, all this stuff. And so, you know, and I remember telling my mom that, and like she's kind of like, I don't know about that, but you know, she was kind of like, this was new territory for her too, you know. She's like, maybe, I guess, you know. And so that's kind of what I told myself, that, you know, I'm an addict and I'm always going to be an addict. Now looking back on it, what I don't like about it is I feel like it's a direct spit in the face to Jesus.
Wow.
Because Jesus lived a perfect life and died a sinner's death. He became sin so that when God looks at Jesus, he sees my sin, and when God looks at me, he sees Jesus. So how dare I go and continue to identify myself with that sin that Jesus died for? A gruesome death, you know, not just like this little like, oh, he passed away. Like, we're talking a gruesome death, painful. And, you know, it just, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's disrespectful to the gospel. You know, especially when we talk about that I'm a new creation.
Yep.
You know, the old has passed. Behold, the new has come.